So we will discuss the basic articles of the Indian Constitution. Before we go to the articles, we will discuss some basic things that will help you to understand the articles of the Indian Constitution. So we will learn Indian Constitution basics, historical background of the Indian Constitution. Before 1947, India was divided into two main entities: the British India, which consisted of 11 provinces, and the princely state ruled by the Indian princes under subsidiary alliance policy. The two entities merged together to form the Indian Union, but many of the legacy systems in British India is followed even now. The historical underpinnings and evolution of the Indian Constitution can be traced to many regulations and acts passed before Indian independence. Right. The next is Indian System of Administration, ISA. Indian democracy is a parliamentary form of democracy, all we know. When the executive is responsible to the parliament has two houses. Number one is Lok Sabha and the second thing is Rajya Sabha. Also the type of governance is federal. Federal means the semi-federal means semi-tilted to the center, right? Is there a separate executive and legislature at center? Is there any separate executive and legislature at center and states? We also have self-governance at the local government, right? At their systems owe their legacy to the British administration. Let us see the historical background of the Indian Constitution and its development through years. So what will we discuss? Some acts we are using from the British era that helps to make our constitution so large and so useful. So there are so many acts that helps to make our constitution. Also we get some constitutional acts from the Irish Constitution, from the American Constitution, Canadian Constitution, and also from Australia, Europe. From there we also taken some acts from themselves, so that we have a consolidated as a compact articles. We will getting these things from the other countries also, but the basic things we getting from the from the British, what the Britishers gave ourselves, the Indian Governance Act. We will discuss what the act is, and we will getting all the basic principle from themselves, right? So let's go to the first regulating act of 1773. First regulating act of 1773. The first step was taken by the British Parliament to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. And it designated the Governor of Bengal. Governor of Bengal was in Fort William as the Governor General of Bengal. Warren Hastings became the first Governor General of Bengal. So Warren Hastings was become the first Governor General of Bengal. Number 4, Executive Council of the Governor General was established. Executive Council of the Governor General was established. 4 number, there was no separate legislative council. It subordinated the governors of Bombay and Madras to the Governor General of Bengal. The Supreme Court was established at Fort William, Calcutta, as the apex court of 1774. It prohibited servants of the company from engaging any private trade or accepting bribes from the natives. Court of Directors, the governing body of the company. Short report is revenue. The first step of decentralization. Next act is Pitt's India Act 1774, that was called a regulating act. So what was the act? Distinguished between commercial and political functions of the company. Court of Directors for commercial function and Board of Control for the political affairs. Reduce the strength of the Governor General's Council to 3 members. Place the Indian affairs under the direct control of the British government. The company's territories in India were called the British Possessions of India. Governors' Council were established in Madras and Bombay. So we will go to the next act, the Charter Act 1813. The company's monopoly over the Indian trade terminated. Trade with India open to all British subjects. And the next act is Charter Act of 1833. Governor General of Bengal became as the Governor General of India. First Governor General of India was Lord William Bentinck. This was the first step towards centralization in the British India. Beginning of the central legislation for India, as the acts also took away legislative powers of Bombay and Madras provinces. The act ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, and it became a purely administrative body. The next act is Charter Act of 1853. The legislative and executive function of the Governor General's Council were separated. 6 members in Central Legislative Council, 4 out of the 6 members were appointed by the provisional governments in Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra. It introduced a system of open competition as the basis of the recruitment of the civil servants of the company. Indian civil servants open for all. The next act is Government of India Act of 1858. The Government of India Act 1858. This is a very nice act after getting the peasant movement. The rule of the company was replaced by the rule of the Crown of India. The powers of the British Crown were to be exercised by the Secretary of State of India. He was assisted by the Council of India, having 15 members. He was vested with complete authority and control over Indian administration through the Viceroy and his agent. The Governor General was made the Viceroy of India. Lord Canning was the first Viceroy of India. Abolished Board of Control and Court of Directors. Indian Council Act of 1861. It introduced the first time Indian representation in the institutions like Viceroy, Executive plus Legislative Council, non-official. 3 Indian entered the Legislative Council. Legislative Council were established in centre and provinces. It provided that the Viceroy Executive Council should have some Indians as the non-official member while transacting that legislative business. Is accorded statutory recognition to the portfolio system, initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative power to the Bombay and Madras provinces. So we will discuss some act in this chapter, and after you go through the articles of the Indian Constitution, and you will know what the article it is, and then we will discuss chapter by chapter so that we can know in details, right? So let's go to the next article, that is Indian Council Act 1892. Introduced indirect elections nomination, enlarged the site of the Legislative Council, enlarged the function of the Legislative Council, and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. The next act is Indian Council Act of 1909. The first one is the act is also known as Morley Minto reforms. Number 2, direct election to the Legislative Council, first attempt at introductory and representative and popular element. Number 3, it changed the name of the Central Legislative Council to the Imperial Legislative Council. Number 4 is the number of Central Legislative Council was increased to 60 from the 16. Number 5, introduced a system of communal representation for Muslim by accepting the concept of separate electorate. Number 6, Indians for the first time in Viceroy Executive Council, Satyendra Prasad Sinha as the law member, right? So next we will discuss the important act, Government of India Act of 1919. This act is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. The central subjects were demarcated and separated from those of the provincial subjects. The scheme of the dual governance diarchy was introduced in the provincial subjects. Under diarchy system, the provincial subjects were divided into 2 parts, transferred and reserved. On reserved subject, governor was not responsible to Legislative Council. The act introduced for the first time bicameralism at center, Legislative Assembly with 140 members and Legislative Council with 60 members. Direct election. The act also required that the 3 of the 6 members of the Viceroy Executive Council other than Commander-in-Chief were to be Indians. provided for the establishment of the Public Service Commission. Next act is a very important act. What is Government of India Act 1935? The act provided for the establishment of All India Federation consisting of the provinces and princely states at units through the emerged federation never came into being. Three lists. There are three lists introduced in this act, very important list. The act divided the powers between the center and the unit into items of the list, namely the federal list, the provincial list, and the concurrent list. The fourth is federal list for the central consisted of the 59 items, of the provincial list for the provinces consisted of the 54 items, and the concurrent list for the consisted of the 36 items. The residuary power was rested with the Governor General. The act abolished by the diarchy in the provinces and introduced provincial autonomy. It provided to the adoption of the diarchy at the center, introduced bicameralism and six out of the 11 provinces. The six provinces were Assam, Bengal, Bombay, Bihar, and Madras, and the unitary province, right? Provided for the establishment of the federal court and abolished the Council of India. It abolished the Council of India. Next act is Indian Independence Act of 1947. It declared India as an independent and sovereign state, established responsible government at both the center and the provinces, designated the Viceroy India and the provincial governors of the constitutional normal heads. It assigned dual function, constitutional and legislative, to the Constituent Assembly and declared the Dominion legislature as sovereign body. Points to be noted: laws made before the Charter Act of 1833 were called the regulations, and those made after called acts. Lord Warring Hastings created the office of district collector in 1772, but judicial powers were separated from the district collector later by the Cornwallis. From the powerful authorities of unchecked executive, the Indian administration developed into a responsible government answerable to the legislator and the people. The development of the portfolio system and budget points to the separation of power. Lord Mayo's resolution on financial decentralization visualized the development of the local self-government institution in India in 1870. 1882, Lord Ripon's resolution was hailed as the Magna Carta of local self-government. He is regarded as the father of local self-government in India. 1921, railway budget was separated from the general budget. From 1773 to 1858, the British tries to centralization of power. It was from the 1861 Council Act they shift towards devolution of power with provinces. 1833 Charter Act was most important act before the Act of 1909. That was called, what is the called 1909 Act? It was called the Morley Minto Reforms. Till 1947, the government of India functioned and diarchy were never implemented. The Executive Council provided by the 1919 Act constitute to advise the Viceroy till 1947. The modern Executive Council of Ministers owes to legacy to the Executive Council. The Legislative Council and Assembly developed into Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha after independence. Note the point. The Legislative Council and Assembly developed into Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha after independence. So this was the basic information regarding the Indian Independence Act, Constitution Acts, and we will discuss from the Act 1 to 395 Acts in the next classes. Thank you for joining.